I want you to do something for me. Just for a moment, wherever you are, whether you're driving or at the gym or sitting on your couch, I want you to close your eyes, if it's safe, obviously.
Okay.
Close your eyes, and I want you to try to imagine a silence.
That seems like a calm place to start. A little meditative.
You would think so. You really would. But I'm not talking about a peaceful silence. I'm not talking about the silence of a library or, a sleeping house at 3 a.m.
Uh-huh.
I'm talking about a specific kind of silence that only exists in one context. I want you to imagine the kind of silence that follows 10 solid hours of screaming.
That is a terrifying distinction to make.
It is. But we have to start there to understand what we're talking about today. The year is 867 CE. We are standing, crouching in the city of York in the north of England.
Jorvik, as it would soon be known.
Or as it was just becoming known.
Exactly.
Okay.
But on this specific day, the transition is just happening. The great heathen army, and that's what the history books call them, that's what the terrified monks called them, has just captured the city. The battle is over.
The battle is effectively over. The shield walls have broken. The defenders are dead or fled. The screaming, the clashing of steel, the roar of fire, it has all stopped. And now there is just this heavy, oppressive, suffocating silence hanging over the city.
It's the silence of the aftermath. It's the vacuum that comes when a society has just been decapitated. All the noise of life is just gone.
Right. And in that silence, we find our entry point into today's deep dive. We are looking at a specific woman. Her name is Eilgifu, or perhaps Eilifu, depending on how you want to handle the Old English dialect.
Let's stick with Eilgifu. It's easier. And the source material we have for her is, well, it's haunting. It paints this incredibly vivid, heartbreaking picture of life interrupted.
It's more than interrupted. It's obliterated. She's 29 years old. And to really feel the weight of this, we have to look at her life just 9 days before this silence fell.
Right. You have to see what was lost. If we rewind the tape 9 days, Eilgifu isn't a victim. She is the definition of the elite. She is the wife of a high-ranking thane.
And for those who aren't up on their Anglo-Saxon social hierarchy, a thane is big time. This isn't just a successful farmer.
Oh, very big time. It's aristocracy. A thane is a lord, a direct retainer of the king. The source says her husband had land stretching from the city walls all the way to the river. We're talking serious wealth and power.
And what did that life look like?
It looked comfortable, secure. The source says she had a household of 30 servants. She had chests filled with silver pennies and fine linens imported from Francia. She was a person of immense status.
But the detail that really stuck with me, and I think this tells us so much about who she was, is the mention of the tutors.
Yes, the Latin tutors.
She had Latin tutors coming to her hall to teach her children. That blew my mind. In 867 CE, in Northumbria.
It's incredibly rare. It's a massive flex, really. It implies not just immense wealth, but a connection to the church and, desire for high culture. It tells you she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. She was at the absolute top of the social pyramid. She was likely literate, sophisticated, and used to being the one giving orders.
That was 9 days ago.
That was a lifetime ago.
No.
Now the pyramid is flipped upside down. Her husband is dead, likely killed at the walls trying to defend the city. Her children are dead. Her servants are scattered, raped, or killed. And Eilgifu is crouching in the corner of a desecrated church.
Describe the scene for us, because the source is very specific about the sensory details here. It's not just a general description.
No, it's visceral. She's not alone. She is chained by the neck. There is an iron collar around her throat, and that collar is linked by a heavy chain to the woman sitting next to her.
So she's literally tethered to a stranger's fate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that woman is linked to the next. The source says there are 43 women in this church. 43 links in a single human chain.
And these 43 women, a week ago, they were the who's who of York.
They were the establishment. Noblewomen, merchants' wives, the daughters of the wealthy.
Yeah.
And the sensory overload is horrific. She's smelling the smoke from the burning city outside. The source mentions the greasy, acrid smell of burning thatch. And worse, she's smelling the blood that is soaked into the stone floor of the church, which is starting to smell coppery and sweet in a sickening way. She's smelling the fear and the filth of 43 people trapped in a small space. And she is waiting.
She's waiting because she knows who is coming. She knows the fighting is done.
Which means the looting is starting. And she knows with absolute certainty that she is the loot. She is the prize.
This is where I think we need to hit the brakes and have a real conversation about our perception of this era. Because when most people hear Vikings, when they hear Great Heathen Army, What is the image that pops into their heads?
Oh, it's the pop culture image. It's the TV shows. It's the video games. We see these rugged, charismatic explorers. They have cool undercut hairstyles. They have eyeliner. They have these intricate tattoos. They're adventurers.
And we root for them. We see them as the protagonists.
We do. We view them as anti-heroes. Sure, they're violent, but we tell ourselves they have a code. They are honorable warriors. They are traitors. They are the cool, adventurous ancestors of the Normans. We have romanticized them to an extreme degree.
We view them through the lens of adventure. We think about the long ships cutting through the mist, the discovery of new lands. It's all very heroic. But the source material we are looking at today, it doesn't care about our romanticism.
Not in the slightest. The sources we are using, and we're pulling from a few different places here, include the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, the Irish annals, and ironically, even the Scandinavian sagas themselves. And they all tell a very different story. They strip away that Hollywood filter.
We aren't talking about exploration today. We are talking about the thrall system.
We are talking about industrial-scale dehumanization, a business model based on human trafficking. We are going to look at what happened after the battle, because the battle is just the acquisition phase, the violent takeover. What happens next is the processing.
And specifically, we're talking about what happened to women like Elgifu.
A warning to our listener. This is going to be a heavy deep dive. We're not glossing over this. We are going to explore the reality of the Berserkers, not as cool character classes in a role-playing game, but as tools of psychological terror.
And we're going to look at the breaking process. And I want to be clear, breaking is the technical term used in the sources. That was used to turn a person into property.
It's methodical, it's systematic, and we're going to follow the reconstructed stories of 5 specific women found in these records. This isn't just general history, this is personal. We are going to try to see this system through their eyes.
So let's go back to the church. Elgifu is watching the door. The silence is broken by footsteps, and she sees men approaching.
But not just any men. The source mentions that Elgifu, even in her terror, notes the distinct difference between the regular Northmen and the specific group walking toward the church.
The regular raiders are scary enough. I mean, these are men who just conquered a fortified city.
The regular raiders are brutal, yes. They are efficient killers. They are soldiers. But the men coming for the high-value captives, the source describes them as moving differently, looking different. They are something else entirely.
She is seeing the Berserkers. And the source mentions that she watches them and realizes their violence doesn't follow any logic she understands. It's chaotic, unpredictable.
So let's unpack this. What exactly is a Berserker? We use the word today to mean going crazy, but it was a specific institution, wasn't it?
It was. It was a very specific and I'd say elite class of warrior. And the etymology itself gives us a clue into what they were. It comes from Old Norse, and scholars have debated it for years. But it basically boils down to 2 meanings, which probably both have some truth to them.
Okay, what's option 1?
Option 1 is bare shirt, as in B-A-R-E. This means they fought without armor, no mail, no leather jerkin, just stripped to the waist.
Which, just pause and think about that. In a battle defined by shield walls, spears, and axes, everyone else is wearing chainmail, leather, helmets, and these guys stripped to the waist.
It's a massive psychological flex. It's an act of theater as much as warfare. It says, I am so protected by the gods, or I am so indifferent to death that I do not need your steel to keep me safe. It's terrifying to look at across a battlefield. Okay, that's bare shirt. And option 2.
Option 2 is bear shirt, B-E-R, meaning they wore the skins of animals, bears, or wolves into battle. They didn't just wear them, they sort of became them.
And this connects to the spiritual aspect, right? The Berserker gang, the Furies.
The Berserker gang, exactly, the Fury. The source describes this state vividly, and it's pure nightmare fuel. It says they would howl like wolves. It says they'd bite the rims of their wooden shields.
Biting the shields. I've always found that detail so specific and weird.
It's a displacement of aggression. Imagine being so physically amped up, so filled with adrenaline and rage, that you need to physically chew on oak just to keep from exploding before the fight starts. It suggests a level of physiological arousal that is, frankly, off the charts.
And then there's the most practical and terrifying part of it. Their insensitivity to pain.
That's the defining characteristic in the sagas. In this state, you could cut a berserker, you could stab him, and he wouldn't even flinch. He might not even notice the wound until the state wore off hours later.
Which also meant they couldn't distinguish friend from foe.
Often, no. They were just engines of destruction pointed in the general direction of the enemy. There are stories in the sagas of berserkers killing their own man in the fury of battle because they were just indiscriminate killing machines.
So the million-dollar question, how? How do they do this? Was it just hype? Was it just a story they told themselves?
The sources offer a few theories, and it was likely a combination of things. You've probably heard the mushroom theory.
The Amanita muscaria, the red toadstools with the white spots, the classic fairy tale mushroom.
Right, that is one theory mentioned in the text, that they were using psychoactive substances to induce a dissociative state. Essentially, they were entering battle while on a potent hallucinogen that numbed pain, dissolved fear, and induced rage.
Which sounds like a recipe for disaster if you're trying to fight in formation, but I guess it worked.
It worked for shock troops, for breaking a shield wall. But other sources suggest it wasn't just drugs. They suggest it was extreme psychological conditioning, a sort of self-induced trance state, maybe learned from childhood, a form of battle hypnosis.
Like programming yourself to flip a switch.
Exactly. Or even that these men had, specific genetic or neurological conditions that made them prone to these rage states. And Viking society found a way to channel that, to weaponize it.
But culturally, to the Vikings themselves, they didn't see it as drugs or mental illness. How did they frame it?
No. They viewed it through a spiritual lens. They believed these men were possessed by animal spirits, the spirit of the bear, the spirit of the wolf, or that they were being ridden by Odin himself, the god of war and frenzy. To the Vikings, this wasn't a disorder. It was a divine gift. It was a sign of a god's favor.
But here is where it gets really interesting and where it connects directly back to Elgifu in that church. The battle at York is over. The fighting is done. But the Berserkers, they don't just turn it off. There's no off switch.
No. And that is the crucial piece of context. You don't enter a chemical or psychological rage state that intense and then just snap back to being a polite member of society the moment the trumpet sounds.
The source talks about the come down.
Exactly. There's a transition period, a period of lingering, simmering aggression. It's like a nuclear reactor cooling down. It's still hot enough to burn you for hours, maybe days afterwards. They were still in a heightened, dangerous state.
And the commanders, the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok in this case, they knew this. They had to manage this.
They were brilliant logisticians. They were sociopaths, but they were brilliant. They knew they had these elite weapons, the Berserkers, who were still hot. They needed to give them a safe outlet for that remaining rage, so they didn't turn on their own army.
And at the same time, they had to reward them.
Right. These men took the highest risks at the wall. They were the first over the top. So you have a two-part problem. How do you reward your best soldiers, and how do you manage their post-battle psychosis?
And the solution to both problems was the captives.
The reward was the first pick of the captives. And not just ownership, but the license to treat them with extreme violence. It was sanctioned. It was viewed as their due payment. The thinking was, you risk your life with no armor, here's the prize, do with it what you will.
This brings us back to that silence in the church. Eilgifu sees a man walking toward her. The source names him Sigurd the Red.
Sigurd the Red. The source basically gives us his CV. He's a veteran berserker. He has been raiding for 12 years. The Chronicle says he killed 14 men at the walls of York that morning. He was the first one over the fortifications.
So he is the alpha of the violence, the most successful predator.
He's the apex predator in that city at that moment.
Yeah.
And because of that, he has the right of first claim. He gets to choose first from the best of the loot.
And Eilgifu is the claim.
She is. And this transitions us into the next phase, because I think we often imagine the aftermath of a raid as just chaos, just looting and running around. But the source material is very clear. This was a system. It was the processing of human property.
It really does read like an industrial manual or a field guide for an occupying army. The source outlines a strict protocol. It wasn't a free-for-all. It wasn't a riot.
No, it was a bureaucracy of brutality.
Let's walk through the 4 stages the source describes, because this is where the thrall system really shows its face. Stage 1 is sorting.
This happens immediately. While the fires are still burning, they need to assess the inventory they've just acquired. They're looking for 3 things, primarily nobility, physical condition, and age.
So it's a triage.
It's an economic triage. Nobility is crucial because high-status captives can be ransomed. That's your first preference. Get them back for a pile of silver.
But the Great Heathen Army, they were here to stay. They weren't just raiding and leaving, so ransom was maybe less of a priority?
Less of a priority than with earlier raids, yes. So the other categories become more important. Physical condition. Can they do hard labor? Are they strong? And age, which often ties into fertility and labor potential.
And in this context, Eilgifu stands out immediately.
She's a beacon. The source notes her fine dyed wool clothing. We have to remember, in this era, color is money. Bright dyes like red or blue are incredibly expensive. It's like wearing a designer watch today. and she's wearing gold rings. To a raider, she is a walking neon sign that says, high value. She isn't thrown in with the commoners or the farmhands. She is separated into the high-value pen.
Okay, that's sorting. Then comes stage 2, claiming. This is what we touched on with Sigurd.
Right, and again, this isn't a scramble. It's a structured distribution. The commanders are there. It's organized. The elite warriors, the berserkers, the champions who breach the wall, they get the high-value targets. Sigurd walks in, he points to Elgifu, and the commanders, Halfdan or Ivar, they nod. It's a transaction. It is legal in their eyes. There are witnesses. It's recorded.
She is officially transferred from army property to private property.
Precisely. And then stage 3. This one gave you chills when I read the notes, marking, this is a pivotal psychological moment. Up until now, maybe she has a generic army collar on, or just ropes, a temporary restraint. But Sigurd removes that, and he places a collar with his specific runic symbol on her neck.
His brand.
It is literally his brand, his maker's mark. And he does it in front of everyone.
Why is that part so important, the public nature of it?
That is key. It's a public performance. It signals to Elgifu and to every other woman in that church that her status is permanently changed. She's no longer a prisoner of war who might be ransomed. She is Sigurd's personal possession. It extinguishes any hope of rescue or return to her old life, and it tells every other Viking, this one is mine. Touch her, and you answer to me.
A symbol of ownership to her and a warning to everyone else.
Yes. And finally, stage 4, removal. She is taken out of the holding area, the church. She's taken to a merchant's house that Sigurd has commandeered for himself. And the sensory details here in the source are just gross. The source says the house smells of old blood, stale smoke, and the musk of bear and wolf pelts.
The smell of the berserker.
Exactly. The smell of her new reality. She's moving from the public sphere of the battle into the private sphere of the monster. And this leads us to the darkest part of the source material. What happens inside that house? The breaking.
You mentioned earlier that the Old Norse term for this translates literally to breaking, like breaking a horse.
Yes. And that analogy is vital for understanding the goal here. The goal isn't just to inflict pain. If you just want to hurt someone, that's torture or sadism. Breaking is constructive in a twisted way. You're deconstructing a person to reconstruct them as property.
So it's not about destruction, it's about rebuilding them into something else.
It's about destroying their agency so they become useful and compliant. It's brainwashing. You're trying to erase the Thane's wife and create a thrall in her place.
It is extreme trauma-based conditioning, and the source outlines 4 phases of this breaking process. It's shockingly methodical, and Elgifu goes through all of them. Let's break them down. Phase 1 is physical dominance.
This typically lasts the first week or 2. It is immediate, overwhelming physical control. The goal is to demonstrate in the most brutal and absolute terms that the captive has 0 agency over their own body.
Elgifu is confined to quarters. Silence is enforced.
She cannot eat unless he allows it. She cannot sleep unless he allows it. She cannot speak unless spoken to. Her body is not her own. The source mentions she witnesses the state of the other captives Sigurd might have, ones who were claimed before her, maybe from previous raids.
Right. She sees a woman who is mute, another who can't make eye contact.
She is seeing her own future. It's a demonstration. This is what happens. This is the end state. Don't fight it. She learns very quickly that she has no control over her own body. Any attempt to assert control, refusing to eat, talking back, is met with overwhelming force.
So her world shrinks to the size of that one room, and the only person in it who matters is her captor.
Precisely. Then comes phase 2, identity destruction. This happens around month 2. Once the physical body is subdued, they start on the mind. This is where they strip away the software of the person. They took her name. She isn't Elgifu anymore. The source says they refer to her just as the Saxon, or thrall, or just woman.
Dehumanizing, taking away the one thing that is uniquely yours.
Completely. Then they cut her hair. You have to remember, for both Anglo-Saxons and Norse, long hair on a noblewoman was a major symbol of status and femininity. Cutting it is a form of castration of identity. It's a visual sign of her new debased status.
They take the jewelry.
Of course. That's just loot. And they take the fine dyed wool and put her in rough, undyed wool, a shapeless sack. So now when she looks at her reflection, she doesn't see Elgifu anymore. She sees a slave.
And they forbid her from speaking about her past life.
This is the most insidious part. She is forbidden from mentioning her dead husband or her children. If you can't speak about your history, you start to lose your connection to it. It begins to feel like a dream you had once, rather than your reality. They are erasing her memory by silencing it.
Phase 3 is conditioning, and the source compares this to Pavlovian reinforcement. This is where it gets really psychologically twisted.
It's the unpredictability that breaks the mind. It's an alternation between kindness and cruelty. If Sigurd is always cruel, 247, she might harden her heart and resist. She might embrace martyrdom and decide to die. But if he is sometimes kind, if he sometimes brings her extra food or a blanket, or touches her gently and then suddenly beats her for no reason,
It creates chaos in her mind. There's no logic.
she enters a state of hypervigilance.
Oh.
She learns to focus entirely on him, on his moods, his breathing, the way he walks into a room. To survive, she has to become an expert on him. She stops thinking, what do I want? And starts thinking, what does he want? What will keep me safe for the next 5 minutes?
Her entire consciousness is reoriented around him.
She anticipates his needs before he even speaks. She brings him his ale before he asks. She learns his routine. That is the definition of a thrall. That is the reconstructed identity.
Then finally, phase 4, testing.
This is around month 4. The conditioning is set. Now they test it. They give her a little freedom, a long leash. Maybe she can walk to the well unsupervised. Or mended tunic without a guard standing over her. It's a test. Will she run?
It's a trap.
It's absolutely a trap. Because if she runs, she will be caught, and the punishment will be so severe it will be the final lesson, and everyone else will see it.
And Elgifu, she doesn't run.
She doesn't. Because by month 4, she has seen the consequences. She has been conditioned. She knows that freedom is an illusion. She passes the test. She is broken.
It's devastating, and it's hard to listen to. But Elgifu is just one story. The source material provides us with 4 other distinct case studies. And I think this is where the deep dive gets really valuable because it shows that not every story ended the same way. The system was universal, but the human response, that varied.
That's right. The outcomes varied based on the woman, the owner, their skills, and frankly, just pure luck.
So we have Elgifu, whose path was compliance. She did the math. She calculated that resistance just meant more pain without changing the outcome.
And look the result. She survived 11 months with Sigurd. She was broken in the technical sense. And then once he was done with her or needed the money, she was sold. The source says she was taken to Hedeby in Denmark, the great slave market, and sold to a Swedish landowner to work on a farm. She was never seen again. She survived, but she was erased from history.
Then we have a very different case. Aid or Edbur from Mercia, she was 19, the daughter of an Ealdor man, which is even higher than a Thane.
Ead's story is fascinating because of who claimed her. She wasn't claimed by a frontline shock trooper like Sigurd. She was claimed by Halfdan.
Halfdan Ragnarsson, a king.
One of the sons of Ragnar. Royalty.
Yeah.
A commander of the entire army. This changes everything for her.
The source calls her situation a gilded cage. Why?
Yes. Because Halfdan is royalty. His property has to look the part. It reflects on him.
Right.
You don't keep a high-value status symbol in a dirty hut. You keep her in your household. She had better food. She had servants, who were also thralls, of course. She was a trophy.
But she wasn't just a trophy, right? She adapted. She found a different path.
She was smart, incredibly smart. She realized that her value lay in her mind and her high birth, not just her body. She learned Old Norse and learned it quickly. She became a translator. She could explain Saxon customs and politics to Halfdan. She became an advisor.
She made herself useful in a way that Elgifu couldn't.
She made herself indispensable. She became what the sources call a favored thrall.
That sounds almost like a success story. I hesitate to even say that.
We have to be very, very careful with that phrasing. Relative to the others, sure, it's a better outcome. But we have to remember, she was still a slave. She was still property. She couldn't leave. She couldn't marry who she wanted. She had no freedom. But she survived 20 years. She died in Scandinavia at 40. She adapted to the system to survive it, and she did so with a measure of dignity that was denied to most.
Now contrast that with Quentrith of East Anglia, 26 years old, mother of 2. Her path was the polar opposite of Elgifu's. It was resistance.
Quentrith is the tragedy of defiance. She was claimed by a warrior named Thorald the Cruel. The name says it all. And from day one, she decided to fight.
She fought back physically.
Physically, verbally. She refused command. She tried to escape multiple times. She bit. She scratched. She never, ever stopped resisting the breaking process.
And I think a modern audience, us watching the movie version of this, we want to cheer for that. That's the heroine we recognize. We want the moment where she fights back and escapes.
We do. We crave that agency. We want the Hollywood ending where the defiant one wins. But the source material is brutal about the reality. Thorald didn't just kill her for her defiance. That would have been too easy. He views her resistance as a challenge, a game. He escalated the breaking.
The source mentions starvation and isolation as his main tools.
He pushed her to the absolute biological limit. It became a contest of wills. He wanted to see how much she could take before she finally broke. And the source says she collapsed after 6 weeks. She didn't surrender. Her body just failed her.
But she didn't die then.
No, she lived for 18 months. The source says she died of traumatic stress, which is a modern term, but it means her body just shut down. Organ failure from prolonged extreme misery.
So resistance allowed her to keep her identity longer. She remained Quentrith to the end.
But it hastened her death and made her life a living hell. It's a horrible calculus. Do you lose yourself to survive, or do you keep yourself and die? There's no right answer there.
Then there is Hild. This one is heavy in a different way. Hild was a nun from Lindisfarne, captured back in 793 in one of the very first major raids.
Hild's story represents desecration. She wasn't captured just for labor or pleasure or status. She was captured specifically to violate her religious vows.
Because to the Vikings, violating a nun was a form of psychological warfare against the Christian god. It was symbolic.
Exactly. It was a statement. Your God cannot protect his brides. Your faith is powerless against our might. It was a way of humiliating the entire Christian population and showing the power of their own gods.
And the sad part is, even her own people used her as a symbol.
That's the tragedy of Hild. The Christian chroniclers, like Alcuin of York, used her story as propaganda. Look what the heathens did to our bride of Christ. Rise up and fight. Her individual humanity, her personal suffering was lost. She became a symbol of victimhood to one side and a symbol of conquest to the other. Nobody saw her.
Finally, we have the only one that the source describes as having something close to a happy ending, and I use those words very lightly. Gajifu of Wessex.
Gajifu. She was 33, which was considered old for a captive in this market. If she was just being sold for labor or breeding, she wouldn't have fetched a high price. But she had a skill, a valuable one.
She was a healer.
She was an herbalist. She knew how to set bones. The source says she knew how to treat infection with poultices. In an age of constant violence and no antibiotics, that skill is worth more than gold.
And that changed the economic logic entirely.
Completely. If you have a healer who can fix your valuable warriors and keep them in the fight, you don't break her. You don't damage her hands or her mind. You need her functional. You need her on your side to some extent. Damaging her would be like smashing your most important tool.
She was claimed by a warrior named Bjorn.
And Bjorn treated her well. Not out of kindness, the source implies, but out of pure utility. And here's the incredible part. After 12 years, she was freed. Manumission. We don't know for sure. She either bought her freedom with earnings she was allowed to keep from treating people, or she was wielded upon Bjorn's death as a reward for her service. The point is, she got out. She stayed in the Danelaw, the Viking part of England, and practiced medicine as a free woman until she died at 52.
So her value as a professional, her utility, saved her.
It gave her leverage. The one thing Ylgifu, Eid, and Quentrith didn't have. It made her more valuable, alive, and functional than broken or sold.
These stories, they really show the spectrum of this system, but eventually for most of them, like Ylgifu, the destination was the same, the market.
The thrall markets. We have to understand the scale of this. This wasn't a local garage sale. These were massive international hubs. Hedeby in Denmark, Berserkers in Sweden, and especially Dublin in Ireland were the epicenters of the North Atlantic slave trade.
And the source mentions that Scandinavian thralls were sold as far away as Baghdad. This wasn't a closed system.
No, this was a global network. The Vikings were the logistical masters of moving human capital. They were the link between the North Sea, the rivers of Russia, and the caliphates of the Middle East. And the description of the markets in the Irish annals and Arabic sources is chillingly commercial.
Like a livestock auction.
Exactly like a livestock auction. There were platforms where thralls were displayed. There were inspections of teeth to determine age and health. There were demonstrations of limbs to prove strength. If you were a weaver, they made you weave. If you were strong, they made you lift heavy stones. It was the total commodification of humanity. You were a product, and your price was determined by your features.
And the journey to get there. Ylgifu went from York across the North Sea to Hedeby, then sold to a buyer from Sweden. That's a hellish journey.
The attrition rate was huge. Disease, exposure to the cold, starvation on the ships, it was just part of the cost of doing business. Many didn't make it to the market. Ylgifu was one of the lucky ones who survived the transport, only to be sold into oblivion.
I want to pivot to the evidence. Because someone listening might think, okay, this sounds like a very dark novel. How do we actually know this? Maybe it's just monks exaggerating to make the Vikings look bad. The source lists a triangulation of truth.
This is how historians work. You can't trust just one source because every source has a bias. So you look for where different independent sources overlap. You triangulate.
First, we have the Anglo-Saxon chronicles.
This is the voice of the victims. They record the suffering, the scale, the terror of the great heathen army. They tell us what it felt like to be invaded. They give us the names and the dates. But of course, they have a bias. They want to portray the Vikings as demonic monsters.
Okay, so you balance that with the Irish annals.
Exactly. The Irish monks were, for some reason, obsessed with recording the details of the Dublin markets. They weren't just writing about terror, they were writing about economics. They confirm the logistics, they list the prices of different kinds of thralls. It's a colder, more detached account that validates the scale of the trade.
But then we have the sagas, the Icelandic sagas, and this is the smoking gun, isn't it? Because this is the Vikings' own story.
It is. It's
Right.
the absolute confirmation. Because the sagas were written by the descendants of the Vikings hundreds of years later, looking back on their heroic age. And they don't hide this. They don't write, oh, it was shameful that our ancestors took slaves. They write about it proudly.
They boast about
They
it.
boast about it. They describe the berserker gangs, the claiming of women after a battle, the breaking. They describe it all as normal, heroic behavior. It's just what a great warrior did. So when the victims say, they did this to us, and the perpetrator's descendants say, yeah, our great-grandfathers did this and it was awesome, you know it happened.
And finally, the archaeology, the hard science.
The physical proof. We have excavated slave quarters. We have found the iron collars, the chains, the manacles, and modern science gives us isotopic analysis, which is incredible. We can look at the chemical signature in the tooth enamel of a skeleton found in a Viking graveyard in Sweden.
And it acts like a geological passport.
Precisely. We can say the isotopes in this woman's teeth show she drank the water and ate the food of Northumbria for the first 20 years of her life. But she died and was buried in chains in Scandinavia. It's the story of Elgifu written in bone.
And the DNA evidence, that's even more definitive.
This is the clincher. If you look at the DNA of the modern population of Iceland, a place settled almost exclusively by the Vikings, you see a startling pattern. The male Y chromosome lines are overwhelmingly Norse, Scandinavian,
Makes sense.
but the female mitochondrial DNA, a massive component in some studies, over 60%, is from the British Isles, from Ireland and Scotland.
The founding mothers of Iceland were captives.
The founding mothers of Iceland were, by and large, women like Elgifu and Quentrith. They were the women taken from the shores of Ireland and Scotland and England to be the wives and concubines of the Norse settlers. The genetic map of Iceland is a map of this slave trade.
Wow, that's undeniable. So what does this all mean? We've walked through the horror of 867, we've met the Berserkers, we've seen the breaking, we've followed the women.
I think the mission of this deep dive was to shatter the silence, that silence in the church at York. We have this pop culture image of the Viking Age as this glorious adventure. And for the men on the longships, maybe it was freedom and glory and gold.
But for the people on the shore,
It was a highly organized system of extraction and dehumanization. The Berserkers weren't just crazy warriors, they were a specific tool, a weapon of terror used to facilitate that extraction. The entire system was designed to turn people into wealth as efficiently as possible.
and the legacy, does it just end there?
The legacy is complex. These practices, capture, breaking, sale, they're universal in the history of slavery, unfortunately.
Right.
The Romans did it, others did it. The Vikings didn't invent slavery, but they mastered the logistics of it in their time and place and built their power on it. And we have to acknowledge that thousands of women are just footnotes. Eilgifu is a name in a text, but there were thousands of Eilgifus whose names we lost, who were just a number in a ledger.
The source leaves us with a final provocative thought about museums, and I can't stop thinking about it since I first read it.
It's a powerful image, isn't it? We walk into a museum, into the Viking exhibit, and we see the swords, we see the beautiful carvings on the longships. We stand in awe of the craftsmanship and the power. We think, wow, they were amazing.
But in the corner, usually in a glass case with less lighting, there are the iron collars.
And the chains. And those collars are the physical evidence of the wealth that built that power. You can't have the golden sword without the iron collar. You can't have the magnificent longship without the human cargo it was designed to carry. They are two sides of the same coin.
So when we tell the story of the Viking Age, when we watch the next cool TV show,
We have to ask ourselves, are we only listening to the victors? Are we only looking at the swords? Because if we listen closely to the silence, if we look at the collars, we can hear the women. They deserve to be remembered not as thralls, not as merchandise, but as the women they were before the ships arrived.
Elgifu, Eid, Quentrith, Hild, Gajifu.
Exactly. They were people, and their stories matter.
That is a lot to process,
Right.
but I think it changes how I'll look at a Viking exhibit forever. Thank you for taking us through this deep, dark water.
It's history we need to know. It's not comfortable, but it's real.
And to our listener, thank you for joining us in the deep end. We'll see you on the next deep dive.
Goodbye.